welcome. I'm Antonina Antosha and you're watching UATV. We're broadcasting from Toronto, Canada, where the conference on the current state of Ukrainian reforms is taking place right now. UATV jointly with Agri Team Canada is launching a special series of interviews dedicated to the progress already achieved by the reforms currently being implemented in Ukraine. And today we're going to be talking about public administration reform. And joining me in the studio today is Olesia Ogryzko. She's a project manager with the Reform Delivery Office of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine.
Well, I'm one of those many Ukrainians who has been abroad for long enough and seen the other countries and studied the other countries. And after the events of 2013 and 2014, I've seen that the country is changing, which has a huge potential and bright future. So I've decided to join the team of reformers. And I thought the procedure will be very complex and you would have to have friends in all that. But it wasn't like that. Well, I just came back to country and I basically went to, as simple as that, Career Go UA. And it had all the information I needed and it was quite clear, like any other international recruitment basically company. You submit this application, all the papers, and well, via mail you have the communication, and I don't know, maybe in like 3 weeks you got all of the interviews, all the steps done, and somebody calls you and say like you are in. And currently my team and I are working on well, basically reforming the state companies. Our primary responsibility is selecting the supervisory boards, the members of the supervisory boards and top CEOs of the state companies in order to make it function more efficient and more better.
I was working for 2 years in charity foundation and education NGO, and once I realized that those strategies that we practice in NGO are much more applicable for public service. At the same time, I saw the post with new public service position and decided, why not trying to make it real? I decided to apply for Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine because there is a new reform, new Ukrainian school that is quite successful. New public service is the new kind of activism, and education is the basement of prosperous Ukraine.
For all these reforms to happen in Ukraine, we need the public administration reform. It is often referred to as the mother of all reforms in Ukraine because it lays the foundation for a transparent, modern and citizen-centric Ukraine. It essentially rests on 4 pillars. 1 being a robust decision-making by the government. 2 being a professional and efficient civil service. 3 being the implementation of e-government in Ukraine. And 4 accessible services for the people. And what is most importantly, all those 4 pillars rest on one very important thing, and that is we're changing the culture of governance from a post-Soviet to the one where the state and its machinery serve its people.
Olesia, in your promotional video, you called public administration reform the mother of all reforms. Why? Could you briefly describe the reform and maybe outline its main components?
Sure. Many people know in Ukraine that our country has undergone a very important process that is called Dicomunisation.
Yes.
Now, public administration reform technically does not really have much to do with decommunization, but for me personally, the public administration reform is about decommunization, but just in the public sector, in the sphere of civil service, in the sphere of good governance, in the sphere of public services. So what do I mean under this? Essentially, Ukraine has been living in a system for too long where the interest of the person, of the individual, is nothing compared to the interest of the state, of the country, of the bureaucratic machinery, etc. We have been in a system for too long where the people serve the state and not vice versa. Now, basically, the public administration reform is about turning around the table and saying, wait a second, we don't want to live in this system anymore. We would like to live in a country where its state is serving the people, where we say the citizen is the center of the universe for us, and we would like to serve for and foremost for the interest of the person. So essentially, public administration reform is about building a modern and democratic Ukraine, which has a very transparent and robust decision-making and governance that is based on best European principles and practices of good governance according to the European standards. So again, public administration reform is basically about restoring the trust in institutions. It's about the transparent and open dialogue between the citizens and the state.
Within the reform, what needs to be done? What kind of changes are going to be implemented so the situation is reversed, so the states start serving the civil society?
So basically, when we are trying to explain the public administration reform in simple terms, we are usually building a house that rests on 4 major pillars and has a little rooftop. So basically those 4 pillars are respectively those things, those elements in the governance system in Ukraine that we are now trying to change.
What are they?
So first, that is the structure. So we're talking about new institutions and institution building in Ukraine. Second, it's about new processes, about rules of procedure, about a normal documental flow between different institutions in Ukraine, and about a sound and robust decision making. Third, and my favorite, is about the people that are serving in the public service, so basically civil servants. And we are having a lot of reforms there. I will be talking about them a little bit later. And the fourth component, which I call the one which is basically the external component, or the one with a human face, because all those 3 that I just described were rather internal, meaning that the target audience of those 3 first pillars are rather the people that are working in the public sector, so civil servants. Whereas the fourth component, which is the...
It's for ordinary citizens?
Exactly.
Beautiful.
That is about the institutions that are communicating with people. It's about administrative services and about administrative procedure. Now we have those 4 pillars, and then we have this little rooftop, and we say this rooftop is a bit soft. Why soft? Because the 4 pillars were the hard components which need legislative changes in bylaws, different structural rearrangements. Whereas the soft components, which are, as I call them, the 3 C's, it's culture, communication, and coordination. Something that you can't really regulate, but it is about how people within the institutions interact with each other, whether there is normal coordination or whether we are being locked up in our little cabinets and don't share any information with each other, etc. It's about the culture of interaction between those people within one institution or even different ones. For example, within the cultural initiatives, we have a very exciting project which is called Book Crossing in the Cabinet of Ministers, where civil servants are encouraged to exchange books in our little bookshelf in order to...
Is it popular within the ministers? I mean, the Book Crossing initiative.
Very much.
I just want to know.
We actually have a very fast flow of those books. That means that people are actually taking books from home, putting into the shelves, and other people are collecting them. So we see a very, very nice dynamic here. Or, for example, we have introduced a feedback loop initiative that serves, for the first time in Ukraine's civil service, the purpose of actually asking the civil servants, how do you like your job? Are you satisfied with the management system? Are you satisfied with the communication, internal, external, etc., etc.? We're running this project together with Stanford University, with the Kyiv School of Economics, and the Professional Government
I'd like to stop on that a little
Association.
bit more. What if the person is answering, well, in many cases it's the truth, and the truth is not likable by the civil servants? What happens to the person?
First of all, it's anonymous, so there is basically no risk that somebody will be punished for their answer. We just started this year. The first part was on the central level, so we asked ministries. Now in summer 2019, we are running the same survey on regional levels, so that we have a very profound picture of how the civil servants actually feel like in their work. So coming back to our 4 pillars, I would like to decompose this little house.
Please do.
And state a little bit more in detail what it is about. Let's maybe start with the structures. So that requires for us to step a little bit back in history and to understand that Ukraine as a country has never had a very long period of time where we were the masters of our lives. Administration, the public administration or decision making was usually made somewhere externally, somewhere where countries have decided how Ukrainian citizens or how Ukrainian people will live. So essentially, within the first pillar, we're talking about recreating those institutions. Unfortunately, on the 28th year of independence of Ukraine, we're still talking about institutional building. So what we did, we had 10 ministries plus 3 other Ukrainian institutions that joined our pilot project in the public administration reform, and we created directorates. Within those new units, those DGs, Director Generals, we have created new positions. They are called reform staff positions, where we're hiring new people for them to work in those units. So the primary goal of those units is basically to reinvent the function of policy making. Because again, if we step back and look at the Soviet times, the public policy making, so the decision making, was always happening in Moscow. Kiev only had to do with actual decisions that needed just to be written down in legislation and essentially just implemented. So now we're talking about just a half of this political cycle. And within this first and second pillar, which are the processes, we're talking about refilling the cycle so that it's really a roundabout. And we say we need those institutions that are think tanks in Ukrainian ministries. So there are units that are really thinking about what will be the impact of a certain policy. Let's say it's childcare, let's say it's changing financial markets, energy market, you name it. So
you've described a lot of interesting information, but I just want to get out one thing. You mentioned that there are 10 ministries, right, working on the project that one of them or several of them you have just dwelled on. So basically, would it be fair to say that there are 10 ministries working on the reform itself?
Working on the...
Would it be fair to say that the whole 10 ministries are working on the reform itself, on the implementation of the public
It's basically 10 ministries plus 2 institutions that are national agencies, one for National Agency for Civil Service and the second is for electronic government, and then the Secretariat of Cabinet of Ministers. So these are the 13 institutions within Ukraine that are piloting out our project, well, our public administration reform. And by the way, last month, the supreme body that is responsible for the public administration reform, which is the Public Administration Reform Council, has adopted a decision that we will add another 3 ministries to this pool of the pilotees. So essentially we're talking now about 16 ministries that will be participating, and of course our goal is to cover up the whole cabinet of ministers as well as central executive bodies to participate in this reform.
16 ministries working on one but very, very large-scale reform. Now we all realize why it's called the mother of all reforms. Olesia, thank you so much for coming here and explaining us what the reform of public administration services is all about.
Thank you.
That was Olesia Ogryzko. She is the project manager with the Reform Delivery Office of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned with UATV. We're broadcasting from Toronto, Canada, where the conference on Ukrainian reforms is taking place.